the day you stop feeling rested. There's a difference between being tired and being drained. Tiredness usually goes away after sleep. Drainage doesn't. You've probably experienced this without fully realizing it. You wake up after 8 hours, but your body still feels heavy. You sit down to work, but your brain feels slow before the day even starts. Small tasks feel mentally expensive. Simple conversations feel harder than they should. And the strange part is this. From the outside, your life may still look functional. You still reply to messages. You still go to work. You still finish responsibilities. You still show up for people. But internally, something changed. You stop feeling restored. Most people don't notice the exact moment this begins because it happens gradually, not through one dramatic breakdown. Through accumulation, weeks of poor sleep, months of unresolved stress, years of treating recovery like a luxury instead of maintenance. Your body adapts quietly at first. That's what makes this dangerous. The human body is incredibly good at compensating temporarily. You can survive on stress longer than you think. You can normalize exhaustion to the point where it starts feeling like your personality. You stop saying, "I'm overwhelmed," and start saying, "This is just how life is." But your body keeps records even when your mind minimizes the problem. Your nervous system tracks pressure. Your sleep quality changes. Your attention span weakens. Your emotional tolerance shrinks. This is why people suddenly become more reactive, impatient, forgetful, or emotionally numb without understanding why. They think something is wrong with their motivation. But often, the real issue is chronic depletion. Imagine your phone battery constantly staying between 5% and 15%. Technically, it still works. You can still send messages, open apps, make calls, but everything becomes slower, unstable, and fragile. That's how many people live emotionally and mentally. Functioning is not the same as being healthy, and modern culture confuses the two constantly. You're rewarded for endurance, for staying available, for pushing through exhaustion quietly. Nobody sees the internal cost immediately, but eventually, your body does. This is why so many people feel disconnected from themselves. Not because they are lazy, not because they lack discipline, but because they have spent too long operating without genuine recovery. And here's the important distinction. Rest is not simply the absence of work. You can spend an entire day resting while still overstimulating your brain, scrolling endlessly, consuming noise constantly, worrying the entire time, staying emotionally tense, never allowing your mind to fully slow down. Real rest is when your nervous system stops preparing for danger. That's why some people sleep for hours but still wake up exhausted. Their body may be physically still, but mentally, they never truly powered down. Stress keeps the system running in the background, like leaving dozens of apps open on a computer until the whole thing overheats. And over time, this changes how you experience life itself. You become less patient with people, less excited about things you used to enjoy, more emotionally detached, more mentally scattered. Even your creativity changes. A drained brain does not think expansively. It thinks defensively. It focuses on survival. Get through the day, finish the task, avoid more pressure, conserve energy. This is why burnout often feels emotionally empty rather than dramatic. People imagine burnout as a breakdown. But for many people, burnout feels quieter than that. It feels like, "I don't feel like myself anymore." And the hardest part is that many people continue blaming themselves while their body is clearly asking for recovery. They call themselves lazy when they're overloaded, weak when they're exhausted, undisciplined when they're mentally depleted. But your body is not failing you by becoming tired. It is communicating with you. Pain, exhaustion, irritability, emotional numbness, and brain fog are not random inconveniences. They are signals. Your system is saying, what you're carrying has become too heavy for too long. The problem is that most people only respect these signals after collapse, after panic attacks, after emotional breakdowns, after losing motivation completely, after their body forces them to stop. But recovery works better when you listen earlier. This is the shift you need to understand. You are not supposed to feel permanently exhausted just because modern life normalizes it. Constant mental fatigue is not proof that you're ambitious. Emotional numbness is not maturity. Running on survival mode is not strength. Your body was designed to move between effort and recovery. Like breathing, you inhale tension, You exhale restoration. But many people stay psychologically inhaling all day long. Constant stimulation, constant pressure, constant comparison, constant responsibility, constant emotional noise. No release, no reset. Eventually, the system loses balance. And once you understand this, you stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What conditions have I been forcing my body to survive in?" That question changes everything because it moves you away from shame and toward awareness. Awareness is where recovery begins, not with perfect routines, not with productivity hacks, not with forcing yourself harder. Recovery starts when you finally stop treating your exhaustion like a character flaw. Why your brain never feels off anymore. There was a time when your mind naturally slowed down. You finished the day, rested, slept, and mentally reset. Now your brain feels like it's permanently open, even when you're lying in bed, even during weekends, even during moments that are supposed to feel peaceful. Your mind keeps running in the background. Unfinished tasks, conversations replaying, future worries, notifications, pressure, comparison, constant input. And after enough time, you stop noticing how mentally crowded your life has become. This is one of the biggest reasons people feel exhausted today. Not because they're physically overworked all the time, but because their brain never fully exits stimulation mode. Your nervous system was not designed to process endless input without recovery. Think about how your phone behaves when too many apps are running at once. The battery drains faster. The device heats up. Performance slows down. Everything becomes less responsive. Your brain works similarly. Every open mental loop consumes energy. Unresolved stress, emotional tension, unfinished decisions, digital overload, social pressure, constant availability. Most people never close these loops. They just stack new ones on top. That's why mental exhaustion feels so strange. You can spend the entire day sitting down and still feel completely drained, because mental labor is still labor. Your brain is constantly filtering information, predicting problems, regulating emotions, and adapting to pressure. And modern life quietly multiplies all of this. Years ago, rest had built-in boundaries. When people left work, they actually left work. Silence existed naturally. Boredom existed naturally. There were gaps where the mind could breathe. Now your attention is being pulled every minute. A single hour online can expose you to bad news, productivity advice, financial pressure, relationship comparison, arguments, unrealistic lifestyles, endless opinions. Your nervous system processes more emotional input in one day than people used to process in weeks. And most of it feels unresolved. That's why your brain struggles to power down. It stays alert because it thinks there is always something else it needs to monitor. This is what survival mode often looks like in modern life. Not physical danger, mental hypervigilance. Your mind becomes trained to constantly scan. What did I miss? What should I be doing? Am I behind? Did I reply? Did I fail? What's next? Eventually, your baseline state becomes tension. And once tension becomes normal, relaxation starts feeling unfamiliar. This is why some people feel uncomfortable doing nothing. Silence feels strange. Stillness feels guilty. Rest feels unproductive. Their nervous system has adapted to constant stimulation. And adaptation can trick you. You start believing, this is just who I am. But often, it's simply what your environment trained your brain to become. There's also another layer people rarely talk about. Many people keep themselves mentally overstimulated because slowing down forces them to feel what they've been avoiding. When your brain is constantly occupied, you don't have to fully sit with loneliness, uncertainty, grief, insecurity, emotional exhaustion. Noise becomes distraction. This is why some people instinctively reach for their phone during every quiet moment. An elevator ride, a bathroom break, 5 minutes alone. Not because the phone is important, because uninterrupted silence now feels emotionally uncomfortable. And over time, this damages your ability to recover mentally. Real recovery requires moments where your brain is not consuming, reacting, or defending itself constantly. This does not mean you need to escape modern life completely. It means you need to understand what your brain actually needs to function properly. The brain is not built for nonstop engagement. It needs cycles, focus and release, effort and recovery, stimulation and quiet. Without those cycles, exhaustion becomes permanent. And this affects more than energy. It affects identity. When your brain stays overloaded for too long, your thinking becomes reactive. Your patience decreases. Your creativity shrinks. Your emotional tolerance weakens. Your motivation becomes unstable. You stop operating intentionally. You start operating automatically, just surviving the next task. And this is why many people no longer feel connected to their own life. Their attention has been fragmented for so long that they rarely experience full presence anymore. They are physically somewhere while mentally somewhere else entirely. Eating while scrolling. Working while worrying. Resting while overstimulated. The brain never fully lands anywhere. So the real problem is not simply being busy. The deeper problem is uninterrupted cognitive pressure. Your brain never receives a full signal that it is safe to stop. And once you understand that, you stop attacking yourself for feeling exhausted all the time. Because exhaustion makes sense when your mind has been carrying invisible weight every hour of the day. This realization matters because it changes the solution. You do not always need more discipline. Sometimes you need fewer open loops, less noise, less pressure, less constant mental occupation. Not because you're weak, because your brain is a biological system, not an infinite machine. And systems eventually break when recovery disappears completely. The hidden cost of living in survival mode. Most people think survival mode looks dramatic. They imagine panic, chaos, complete collapse. But real survival mode is often quieter than that. It looks like waking up already tired, living from deadline to deadline, never feeling fully relaxed around your own life. You keep functioning so nobody notices the damage immediately, not even you. That's what makes survival mode dangerous. It slowly changes what feels normal. You stop asking, "Why am I so stressed?" and start saying, "This is just adulthood." But your body does not experience survival mode as normal life. It experiences it as prolonged threat exposure. And the body always adapts to repeated conditions. If you repeatedly live under pressure, your nervous system starts reorganizing itself around pressure. This is important to understand because your brain is not only reacting to your environment, it is learning from it. When stress becomes constant, your body begins preparing for danger automatically. Elevated alertness, shallow breathing, muscle tension, poor sleep quality, emotional reactivity, constant mental scanning, even when no immediate danger exists. This is why some people feel exhausted after doing nothing. Their body never actually rested internally. Survival mode keeps the system partially activated all the time. Imagine driving a car while keeping your foot slightly pressed on the gas pedal for years. The engine overheats eventually, not because of one moment, because there was never full release. This is how chronic stress works. And over time, survival mode starts affecting your identity, not just your energy. You become more irritable because your nervous system has less tolerance. You become emotionally numb because constant stress overloads emotional processing. You lose motivation because your brain shifts from growth mode into energy conservation. This is why exhausted people often stop recognizing themselves. The version of you that was creative, curious, patient, and emotionally present becomes harder to access. Not because it disappeared permanently, because survival consumes resources. When your brain is focused on protection, it deprioritizes everything that feels non-essential. Creativity, joy, playfulness, emotional openness, long-term thinking. Survival mode narrows your world. Your brain becomes focused on immediate management. Get through today, avoid more stress, finish the task, recover enough to repeat tomorrow. And eventually, life starts feeling mechanical. You wake up, work, scroll, distract yourself, sleep poorly, repeat. Not because you chose that life intentionally, because exhausted systems default to familiar patterns. This is why burnout often feels emotionally flat instead of dramatic. People expect breakdowns to look emotional, but many people in survival mode feel less emotion, not more. Their system becomes emotionally muted, like lowering the brightness on a screen to preserve battery life. You may still laugh occasionally, still function socially, still appear fine, but internally, you feel disconnected from your own emotional depth. And this creates another painful problem. You begin blaming yourself for changes caused by chronic overload. You think, why am I less motivated? Why can't I focus anymore? Why do simple things feel difficult? Why don't I enjoy things like I used to? But these are often symptoms of depletion, not personal failure. Your body is trying to conserve energy, and modern culture rarely explains this properly. It teaches people to push harder when they're already overloaded. More productivity, more optimization, more discipline, more stimulation. But overloaded systems do not always need more force. Sometimes they need restoration. This is why many people keep searching for motivation when the real issue is recovery. You cannot think clearly on permanent emotional exhaustion. You cannot stay deeply creative while mentally overcrowded. You cannot remain emotionally available while your nervous system feels unsafe constantly. The system matters. And once you understand this, you stop viewing your struggles in isolation. You realize your environment, habits, workload, sleep, emotional pressure, digital exposure, and unresolved stress are all interacting together. Your life is not made of separate compartments. Your body experiences everything as one connected system. This changes how you should think about healing. Healing is not simply thinking positive. It is reducing the conditions that keep your system trapped in survival mode. That may mean improving sleep, creating boundaries, reducing overstimulation, slowing your schedule, processing emotions honestly, stepping away from toxic environments, allowing yourself moments of genuine recovery. Not because you are weak, because no nervous system functions well under endless pressure. And maybe the hardest realization is this. Some people have lived in survival mode for so long that peace feels unfamiliar now. They become restless when life slows down, suspicious when things feel calm, uncomfortable without pressure. Their identity became attached to survival itself. But surviving is not the same as living well. Your body was designed for more than endurance. It was designed for rhythm, effort and recovery, focus and release, challenge and restoration. Without restoration, survival eventually becomes self-destruction. And many people do not realize this until their body forces the lesson on them physically, emotionally, or mentally. The goal is not to eliminate all stress from life. That's impossible. The goal is to stop living as if your nervous system can absorb unlimited pressure without consequence. Because eventually, every overloaded system sends a bill. Why high-functioning exhaustion is so dangerous. One of the most misleading things about exhaustion is that you can still look functional while experiencing it. You still meet deadlines, still answer messages, still show up to work, still joke with people, still handle responsibilities. So everyone assumes you're okay. You assume it too. This is what makes high-functioning exhaustion dangerous. Your life keeps moving forward while your internal state quietly deteriorates. And because there's no dramatic collapse immediately, you continue pushing past your limits without realizing how much damage is accumulating underneath. Most people think burnout only happens to people who can't handle pressure. But burnout often happens to people who are very capable, responsible people, reliable people, people who learned how to keep functioning no matter how they feel, especially people who became emotionally independent too early in life. When you grow used to carrying pressure constantly, you stop treating exhaustion as a warning sign. You treat it as your normal operating state. That's why high-functioning people are often the last to notice they're overwhelmed. Their coping mechanism is performance. Instead of slowing down, they become more productive, more organized, more emotionally controlled. From the outside, this looks impressive. Internally, it can become destructive, because functioning is not the same as recovering. You can be productive and deeply depleted at the same time. This creates a dangerous illusion. If I'm still functioning, I must be fine. But the body does not measure health by productivity. It measures stress by load. And your nervous system still absorbs every hour of pressure, emotional suppression, overstimulation, and exhaustion regardless of how efficient you appear externally. This is why some people suddenly crash after years of appearing strong. The collapse feels sudden to others. But internally, the damage had been accumulating quietly for a long time. Think about a ceiling with a slow leak. For months, everything looks stable from the outside. Then one day, the surface caves in. People call the collapse unexpected, but the structure had been weakening the entire time. High-functioning exhaustion works the same way, and one of the hardest parts is that society rewards it. People praise you for sacrificing sleep, always being available, handling everything alone, never complaining, staying productive under pressure. But many of these behaviors are actually warning signs of chronic overload, especially when rest starts feeling impossible. Some people no longer know how to stop mentally. Even during vacations, their mind keeps scanning. What needs to be fixed? What they forgot? What's waiting for them later? Their body may sit still, but their nervous system never fully disengages. This is why high-functioning exhaustion often leads to emotional disconnection. Not because the person stopped caring, because the system became overloaded. Emotions require energy to process fully. Presence requires energy. Patience requires energy. Creativity requires energy. When your system stays overloaded long enough, your brain starts prioritizing efficiency over emotional depth. You become more mechanical, more task-oriented, more emotionally distant without intending to be. And eventually, life starts feeling strangely flat. You keep achieving things, but the emotional reward fades quickly. You finish one task and immediately think about the next. No satisfaction. No real recovery. No feeling of arrival. This is one reason many high-achieving people secretly feel empty despite being externally successful. Their nervous system never exits performance mode. And performance mode is useful for survival, but terrible for long-term well-being. You cannot permanently live as a human machine. Eventually, something starts breaking. Sleep quality, motivation, emotional stability, focus, physical health, relationships, sense of self. And many people ignore these signs because they still technically function. But functioning while depleted comes with hidden costs. You become less emotionally available to people you love. You lose the ability to enjoy simple moments fully. Your creativity becomes survival-focused instead of expansive. Your inner world becomes quieter, flatter, heavier. Not because you failed, because overloaded systems narrow themselves to conserve energy. This is also why rest can feel emotionally threatening for high-functioning people. Without work, distractions, or responsibilities, they are finally left alone with themselves. And many realize how exhausted they actually are only in silence. That realization can feel uncomfortable. Because if your identity has been built around being dependable, capable, and productive, slowing down may feel like losing part of yourself. But this is the truth many people eventually learn too late. Your value cannot be sustained by permanent self-abandonment. At some point, your body asks a direct question. How long do you expect me to carry all of this without recovery? And eventually, the body answers for you. Through burnout, through numbness, through anxiety, through emotional collapse, through chronic exhaustion you can no longer ignore. This is why awareness matters early, not after complete breakdown. The goal is not to stop being ambitious, disciplined, or responsible. The goal is to stop confusing chronic self-neglect with strength. Real strength includes recovery, because recovery is what allows effort to remain sustainable without destroying the person carrying it. You're not lazy, you're overloaded. One of the most damaging things exhausted people do is mislabel their condition. They call themselves lazy when their system is overloaded. And after hearing that long enough, from themselves or from other people, they start believing it. But laziness and exhaustion are not the same thing. A lazy person avoids effort because they simply do not care. An overloaded person often cares too much for too long without enough recovery. That difference matters, because many people who think they are lazy are actually mentally overcrowded, emotionally exhausted, overstimulated, sleep-deprived, carrying unresolved stress, functioning without real recovery for months or years. Their motivation is not broken. Their energy system is overwhelmed. Imagine trying to run 10 heavy programs on an old laptop without ever restarting it. Eventually, the system slows down, not because the laptop became lazy, because it exceeded sustainable capacity. Humans work similarly. Your ability to focus, create, decide, regulate emotions, and stay motivated depends heavily on available mental and physical energy. When that energy becomes depleted, simple tasks begin feeling unusually difficult. Not because you suddenly became weak, because overloaded systems struggle to allocate resources properly. This is why exhausted people often experience something confusing. They still want to do things mentally, but feel resistance physically and emotionally. You may want to start the project, reply to the message, clean the room, fix your routine, work on your goals. But internally, everything feels heavier than it should. That heaviness is important. It's not always laziness. Often, it's accumulated cognitive and emotional fatigue. Your nervous system has been carrying too much without enough restoration. And eventually, the brain starts conserving energy automatically. This is one reason chronic stress destroys motivation over time. The brain shifts priorities. Instead of exploration, growth, creativity, and long-term thinking, it starts focusing on efficiency and survival. It asks, what requires the least energy right now? This is why exhausted people gravitate toward passive stimulation. Scrolling, binge watching, endless consumption, avoidance behaviors, not necessarily because they lack ambition, but because passive stimulation requires less psychological effort than intentional action. This realization changes how you should interpret your habits. Sometimes procrastination is not a discipline problem. Sometimes it is an overload problem. Your system may already be operating near capacity, and overloaded brains avoid tasks that feel emotionally or cognitively expensive, especially when those tasks involve uncertainty, pressure, or self-judgment. This is also why many people become harsh toward themselves during burnout. They compare their current energy to a previous version of themselves. I used to be more motivated. I used to work harder. Why can't I function like before? But they rarely compare the level of pressure too. Maybe the old version of you slept better, had less emotional weight, experienced less digital overload, had fewer responsibilities, felt safer mentally, had more recovery time. Context matters. Performance does not exist independently from environment. And this is where many people become trapped. They keep attacking themselves psychologically instead of reducing the load crushing their nervous system. More guilt, more shame, more pressure. But guilt is not recovery. Self-hatred does not create sustainable energy. In fact, constant self-criticism often increases exhaustion because your nervous system interprets internal pressure similarly to external pressure. You become both the exhausted person and the person attacking the exhaustion. That creates an endless cycle. And modern culture unintentionally reinforces this cycle constantly. You are told, wake up earlier, optimize harder, stay disciplined, stop making excuses, push through discomfort. And while discipline absolutely matters, advice becomes dangerous when it ignores nervous system reality. An exhausted system cannot perform like a recovered one. That is not weakness. That is biology. Even athletes understand this. A muscle pushed beyond recovery eventually loses strength instead of gaining it. The same thing happens mentally and emotionally. Without recovery, focus weakens, emotional resilience drops, motivation fluctuates, creativity shrinks, decision fatigue increases, and eventually, basic life starts feeling overwhelming. Not because you are incapable, because your system is overloaded. This perspective matters because it changes the emotional tone of recovery. Instead of seeing yourself as broken, you start seeing yourself more accurately. You stop asking, what's wrong with me? And start asking, what has my mind and body been carrying continuously without relief? That question creates compassion without removing responsibility. Because this is not about avoiding effort. It's about understanding the conditions required for sustainable effort. You still need discipline. You still need accountability. You still need action. But sustainable growth cannot come from permanent depletion. At some point, recovery stops being optional. And one of the healthiest realizations you can have is this. Your exhaustion is not proof that you are failing. Sometimes it is proof that your system has been trying to survive conditions it was never meant to carry endlessly. How stress quietly changes your personality. One of the most unsettling parts of chronic exhaustion is realizing you don't feel like yourself anymore. Not dramatically, quietly. You become less patient than you used to be, less emotionally available, less curious, less excited, less tolerant of small inconveniences. And because these changes happen gradually, many people assume this is simply adulthood changing them. But often, it's prolonged stress reshaping how their nervous system operates. Stress does not only affect energy, it affects personality expression. The version of you that people experience day to day is heavily influenced by the condition of your nervous system. When your system feels safe and regulated, you naturally have more access to patience, creativity, humor, emotional warmth, focus, openness. But when your system stays overloaded for too long, those qualities become harder to access consistently. Not because they disappeared, because survival mode reallocates energy. Your brain starts prioritizing protection over expression. This is why exhausted people often become more reactive. A small inconvenience suddenly feels overwhelming. A simple conversation feels emotionally expensive. Minor stress triggers disproportionate frustration. And afterward, many people feel confused by their own reactions. They think, why am I becoming this kind of person? But your emotional tolerance is deeply connected to available energy. Imagine carrying heavy bags all day long. Even a light touch from someone else starts feeling irritating because your system is already overloaded. Psychological stress works similarly. When your nervous system is already strained, small additional pressures feel much larger than they actually are. This also explains emotional numbness. Many people assume numbness means they no longer care. But often, numbness is a protective adaptation. Your brain reduces emotional intensity because the system is overwhelmed, like dimming lights during a power shortage. This is why people under chronic stress often describe life feeling flatter. Less excitement, less emotional connection, less motivation, less joy, less presence. The emotional range narrows because the nervous system is trying to conserve resources. And unfortunately, people often personalize these symptoms. They think, I became cold, I became boring, I became negative, I lost who I was. But stress changes behavior patterns more than most people realize. Even your thinking style changes under prolonged pressure. A regulated brain thinks expansively. An overloaded brain thinks defensively. It focuses on preventing problems, reducing uncertainty, avoiding mistakes, conserving energy. This is why stressed people often stop taking creative risks or exploring new ideas. Not because they lack imagination, because the nervous system perceives uncertainty as additional load. And over time, this affects relationships too. Exhausted people unintentionally withdraw from others. Not always physically. Emotionally, they respond shorter. Avoid deeper conversations. Feel drained by social interaction faster. Again, not necessarily because they stopped caring. Because connection requires emotional bandwidth. And chronic stress reduces available bandwidth significantly. This creates a painful cycle. The more exhausted people become, the more disconnected they feel from themselves and others. Then they blame themselves for becoming distant, which creates more emotional pressure. This is why many people secretly grieve older versions of themselves. They miss how alive they used to feel, how emotionally present they used to be, how motivated they used to feel naturally, how easy joy once felt. What they often do not realize is this. That version of them may have existed under very different nervous system conditions. More sleep, less pressure, less emotional burden, more safety, more recovery. The human personality is not separate from biology. Your emotional experience is deeply affected by your internal state. And this realization matters because it changes how you approach healing. You stop treating yourself like a moral failure and start understanding yourself as a stressed system needing recovery. That shift creates compassion without removing responsibility. Because yes, you are still responsible for your actions, but responsibility becomes healthier when paired with understanding. You cannot regulate yourself well while chronically dysregulated. You cannot consistently show patience while mentally overloaded every day. You cannot access your best emotional qualities while surviving on exhaustion. This is why recovery is bigger than productivity. Recovery helps restore access to yourself. The calmer your nervous system becomes, the more emotional space returns. Space to think clearly, space to feel deeply, space to listen, space to enjoy life again, space to respond instead of react. And this may be one of the most important realizations in the entire conversation. You are not always meeting the real you when you are chronically stressed. You are often meeting a survival version of yourself, a version built for endurance, not peace. And while that version may have helped you survive difficult periods, it was never meant to become your permanent identity. The guilt of resting in a productivity-obsessed world. One of the clearest signs that your relationship with rest has become unhealthy is this. You feel guilty when you stop, not because you're doing something wrong, because your nervous system has learned to associate worth with productivity. This conditioning starts earlier than most people realize. You are praised for being useful, being busy, being dependable, working hard, sacrificing comfort, pushing through exhaustion. Very few people teach you how to rest without shame. So eventually, Many people stop viewing rest as maintenance. They start viewing it as weakness, laziness, or wasted time. This creates an exhausting internal conflict. Your body asks for recovery. Your mind responds with pressure. You try to relax, but part of you keeps whispering, "You should be doing something. You're falling behind. You haven't earned this." Other people are working harder. And because modern life constantly exposes you to other people's achievements, this pressure never fully turns off. You rest for 10 minutes and immediately see someone building a business, someone improving themselves, someone making money, someone being more productive. Comparison destroys recovery because it keeps your nervous system psychologically activated. Your body cannot fully relax while your mind feels threatened constantly. And this is why many people no longer experience real rest. They experience interrupted rest. Their body is still, but mentally they remain on. Thinking, comparing, planning, worrying, feeling behind. The nervous system never fully receives the message. You are safe enough to recover right now. This matters more than people realize, because guilt changes the quality of rest itself. You can physically stop working while emotionally staying under pressure. An emotionally pressured rest does not restore the system deeply. It's similar to trying to charge your phone while dozens of power-hungry apps are still running in the background. Recovery becomes slower and weaker. This is one reason burnout persists even after taking breaks. The external activity stops, but the internal pressure remains active. And for many people, the guilt goes deeper than productivity. Rest forces stillness. Stillness removes distraction. And without distraction, many people finally become aware of emotions they've been suppressing. Loneliness, sadness, uncertainty, resentment, emotional exhaustion, fear about the future. This is why some people unconsciously stay busy all the time. Busyness protects them from self-confrontation. As long as life remains noisy, they never fully have to sit with themselves. But eventually, avoidance creates another kind of exhaustion, because constantly running from internal discomfort consumes energy too. This is why some people feel strangely uncomfortable during peaceful moments. They are not used to internal quiet. Their nervous system became attached to stimulation and pressure. Peace feels unfamiliar, and unfamiliar things often feel unsafe at first. This creates a painful paradox. The thing your body desperately needs begins feeling emotionally difficult to allow. You want rest, but struggle to accept it fully. And the longer this pattern continues, the more disconnected people become from their own needs. They stop asking, "What would actually help me recover?" and start asking, "What would make me look productive?" That shift changes your entire relationship with yourself. Your life becomes performance-oriented instead of health-oriented. Even self-care becomes another task to optimize, another thing to do correctly, another standard to fail. And eventually, people lose the ability to simply exist without evaluating themselves constantly. This is one of the hidden psychological costs of productivity culture. You become valuable only when producing, useful only when achieving, acceptable only when progressing visibly. But your nervous system does not operate according to social media standards. It operates according to biological reality, and biological systems require recovery. No amount of ambition removes that truth. Even high performers in every field rely on recovery cycles. Athletes, artists, musicians, writers, entrepreneurs. Performance without recovery eventually collapses. Always. Not because humans are weak, because sustainable output depends on restoration. And this is the perspective shift many people need desperately. Rest is not separate from growth. Rest supports growth. You are not pausing your life when you recover properly. You are protecting your ability to continue living it well. This does not mean avoiding responsibility or abandoning discipline. It means understanding that your body is not a machine designed for nonstop extraction. And maybe one of the healthiest things you can learn is this: you do not need to justify every moment of recovery in order for it to matter. Your body already understands something your mind keeps forgetting. Repair happens during the pause. Why your body starts breaking before your mind admits it. One of the hardest truths about chronic stress is this: your body often recognizes the damage before your mind is willing to admit it. Because the mind can rationalize almost anything. You tell yourself, "I'm just tired. It's only temporary. I'll rest later. I just need to push through this phase." And sometimes that phase lasts years. Meanwhile, Your body keeps sending signals quietly, not dramatic warnings at first. Subtle ones: trouble sleeping, brain fog, frequent tension headaches, digestive issues, constant fatigue, shorter patience, feeling emotionally flat, waking up already exhausted. Most people dismiss these symptoms because they can still technically function. But functioning does not mean your system is healthy. It only means your body is compensating. And compensation has limits. Think about a building with structural damage. At first, the cracks are small. Nothing collapses immediately. People continue walking through it normally. But the structure weakens over time beneath the surface. That's how chronic stress affects the body. The damage accumulates gradually before it becomes impossible to ignore. This happens because your nervous system is deeply connected to every major system in your body. When stress becomes chronic, your body does not treat it as just mental. It responds biologically. Stress hormones stay elevated longer. Muscles stay tense longer. Sleep quality decreases. Inflammation increases. Recovery slows down. And eventually, the body starts paying the cost physically. This is why emotionally overwhelmed people often experience physical symptoms even when no major illness exists. The body and mind are not separate systems competing with each other. They are communicating constantly. Your body reflects the conditions your nervous system lives in repeatedly. And one of the biggest mistakes people make is waiting for catastrophic symptoms before taking themselves seriously. They ignore constant exhaustion, emotional numbness, digestive discomfort, tension, chronic stress, inability to relax, loss of motivation, because none of these feel serious enough. But small symptoms are often early conversations from the body. The body whispers before it screams. And unfortunately, modern culture teaches people to override those whispers constantly. Drink more caffeine, push harder, sleep less, stay productive, ignore discomfort. Temporary performance becomes more important than long-term stability. But the body always keeps score eventually. And the frightening part is that many people become disconnected from their own physical signals completely. They no longer recognize what calm feels like. Tension becomes normal. Exhaustion becomes normal. Mental overstimulation becomes normal, until the body forces awareness through stronger symptoms. This is why some people suddenly experience panic attacks, emotional breakdowns, burnout, chronic fatigue, severe anxiety, physical exhaustion they cannot override anymore. To outsiders, it appears sudden. Internally, the body had been absorbing pressure for a very long time. And this creates an important realization. You cannot permanently negotiate against biology. Your body is adaptable, but not infinite. Eventually, neglected recovery becomes visible physically, emotionally, mentally, or all three at once. This is also why emotional suppression becomes dangerous over time. Many people think being strong means ignoring stress completely, but ignored emotions still affect the nervous system. The body still processes unresolved pressure even when the conscious mind tries to move past it quickly. This is why people sometimes feel exhausted without understanding why. Their body may be carrying prolonged tension, unresolved grief, chronic pressure, emotional suppression, overstimulation, lack of recovery, all at the same time. And because the load accumulated gradually, they never noticed how heavy it became, until basic life started feeling difficult. This is where many people finally reach a breaking point emotionally, not because one thing destroyed them, because hundreds of small pressures accumulated without enough release. That distinction matters, because it changes how healing works too. Healing rarely happens through one dramatic solution. It usually happens through reducing pressure consistently, improving sleep, creating emotional boundaries, allowing recovery, reducing overstimulation, processing stress honestly, slowing down enough for the nervous system to regulate again. Small forms of restoration repeated consistently often matter more than extreme temporary changes. And maybe the most important thing to understand is this: your body is not betraying you when it becomes exhausted. It is trying to protect you. Exhaustion is often a signal that your system can no longer sustain the conditions you've normalized. That signal deserves attention before the body is forced to make it impossible to ignore. The physical signs your nervous system is exhausted. Most people wait for dramatic symptoms before they admit something is wrong. But nervous system exhaustion usually starts with smaller physical signals that are easy to normalize. That's the problem. The body adapts quietly. You adjust to the symptoms slowly enough that they start feeling ordinary. You stop noticing how tense your body feels constantly, how shallow your breathing became, how difficult it is to fully relax, how mentally foggy you feel every day, how often your energy crashes unexpectedly. You begin treating dysfunction like personality. This is just how I am now. But the body is often communicating long before complete burnout happens. One of the clearest signs is persistent fatigue that rest does not fully fix. Not normal tiredness, a deeper kind, the kind where weekends don't feel restorative, sleep feels incomplete, your mind feels heavy even after doing very little. Basic responsibilities require unusual effort. This happens because exhaustion is not always caused by activity alone. It is often caused by prolonged activation. Your nervous system has been on for too long, mentally alert, emotionally tense, psychologically scanning, and even when you stop moving physically, the internal activation continues. Another major sign is brain fog. People describe it differently. Difficulty focusing, slower thinking, forgetfulness, mental heaviness, trouble processing information clearly. This often creates shame because people think they are becoming unintelligent or undisciplined. But overloaded systems prioritize survival efficiency, not mental sharpness. When the nervous system stays stressed continuously, higher cognitive functions become less consistent. Your brain starts conserving resources. This is why exhausted people often struggle with tasks that previously felt easy, not because they suddenly became incapable, because their system is overloaded. Sleep problems are another major signal. And interestingly, exhaustion does not always make sleep easier. Many exhausted people feel physically tired while mentally overstimulated. Their body wants rest. Their nervous system refuses shutdown. So they overthink at night, wake up frequently, feel alert at the wrong times, struggle to feel deeply rested. This is what prolonged stress does. The body loses rhythm. Recovery becomes inconsistent. You may also notice physical tension becoming constant. Jaw tightness, neck pain, shoulder tension, headaches, digestive discomfort. These are not random inconveniences disconnected from your emotional state. The nervous system influences muscle tension, digestion, breathing patterns, and inflammation directly. Your body reflects the psychological environment you repeatedly live in. And this is why chronic stress eventually feels physical, because it is physical. Another overlooked sign is emotional exhaustion showing up as sensory exhaustion. Small noises become irritating. Crowded spaces feel draining. Simple interactions require more energy. You become easier to overwhelm. This happens because overloaded nervous systems become more sensitive to incoming stimulation. The system already feels strained, so additional input feels heavier than normal. You can see this clearly after difficult periods in life. When someone has been emotionally overloaded for months, even minor stress suddenly feels enormous. Their capacity shrinks temporarily, not because they are weak, because recovery has been missing. This is also why some people lose motivation for things they genuinely care about. Their brain is not refusing meaning. It is conserving energy. An exhausted nervous system often avoids activities that require emotional or cognitive effort, even if those activities are important personally. And this creates painful confusion. You still care, but you no longer feel capable consistently. This is one reason chronic stress can quietly damage self-esteem. People misunderstand their symptoms. They interpret nervous system exhaustion as laziness, lack of discipline, weakness, failure, lack of ambition. But many symptoms are actually adaptive responses from an overloaded system trying to survive prolonged pressure. This does not mean every physical symptom is caused by stress alone. Medical concerns should always be taken seriously and evaluated appropriately when needed. But many people underestimate how deeply chronic stress affects physical functioning. The body does not separate emotional pressure from biological response as cleanly as people imagine. Your nervous system experiences both together. And once you begin recognizing these patterns, you stop treating exhaustion like something you should endlessly override. You start paying attention earlier. That awareness matters because most breakdowns are not truly sudden. They are prolonged warning signs ignored for too long. and your body would almost always prefer to be listened to early instead of being forced to speak louder later. Why constant stimulation is draining you. Your brain was never designed to receive nonstop input all day long, but modern life trains you to live that way. From the moment you wake up, your attention gets pulled in dozens of directions. Notifications, messages, videos, news, work, advertisements, conversations, endless scrolling, background noise. And because this environment became normal gradually, most people underestimate how exhausting it actually is. The human brain pays for stimulation with energy. Every piece of information requires processing, attention, interpretation, emotional reaction, comparison, decision-making. Even small interactions consume cognitive resources. And when the brain never gets enough silence between inputs, mental fatigue starts accumulating quietly. This is why some people feel exhausted despite not doing physically demanding work. Their nervous system has been processing stimulation constantly for hours without recovery. Imagine being in a crowded room where multiple people talk to you nonstop all day. Eventually, you would feel mentally overwhelmed even if you never moved physically. That's what modern digital life often does psychologically. Your attention is constantly being interrupted. An interruption itself is exhausting. Every time your brain switches focus, it spends energy reorienting itself. This weakens concentration, increases mental fatigue, and leaves your nervous system feeling scattered. That scattered feeling matters, because overstimulated brains struggle to feel emotionally settled. Your attention keeps fragmenting. One thought to another, one app to another, one task to another, one emotional trigger to another. The mind never fully lands anywhere. And when attention becomes fragmented long enough, presence disappears. You stop fully experiencing moments because your brain stays partially occupied somewhere else. This affects more than productivity. It affects your relationship with life itself. You eat while scrolling, watch shows while checking notifications. Why constant stimulation is draining you. One of the biggest reasons people no longer feel mentally rested is because their brain rarely experiences true silence anymore. Not external silence, internal silence. Your attention is constantly being occupied by something. Notifications, videos, music, messages, scrolling, opinions, background noise, endless information. And because this has become normal, most people never stop to ask what nonstop stimulation is actually doing to their nervous system. The human brain was not designed for uninterrupted input. It was designed for cycles, focus, release, engagement, recovery. But modern life removes many of those recovery spaces naturally. Now there is almost no separation between work and rest, information and overload, connection and intrusion, entertainment and escape. Your brain stays partially engaged all day long. And the dangerous part is that stimulation can feel relaxing temporarily while still exhausting the nervous system underneath. This is why many people confuse distraction with recovery. Scrolling for 3 hours may feel easier than working, but easier does not always mean restorative. Your brain is still processing images, emotions, comparisons, information, noise, novelty. The nervous system remains active. Imagine trying to recover physically while someone keeps tapping your shoulder every few seconds. Even small interruptions prevent full rest. Constant stimulation works similarly on the brain. Your attention never fully settles. This is one reason people struggle with mental clarity now. The brain rarely gets uninterrupted space to process experiences deeply. Instead, every uncomfortable feeling gets interrupted immediately by more input. Bored? Open your phone. Anxious? Watch something. Lonely? Scroll. Emotionally uncomfortable? Distract yourself. Over time, this conditions the brain to avoid stillness automatically. And eventually, silence itself starts feeling uncomfortable. Not because silence is harmful, because your nervous system became dependent on constant engagement. This is why many people instinctively reach for stimulation during every empty moment. While eating, before sleeping, during conversations, while walking, even while watching something else already. The brain becomes uncomfortable without input because it lost familiarity with quiet presence. And the cost of this is larger than people realize. Constant stimulation fragments attention. It becomes harder to focus deeply, harder to think clearly, harder to feel emotionally grounded, harder to stay present. Your mind starts operating in short bursts instead of sustained awareness. This affects creativity too. Creative thinking often requires mental spaciousness, not endless input. The brain needs room to connect ideas naturally, but overstimulated minds rarely experience that spaciousness anymore. Every quiet moment gets filled before reflection can happen. This is also why many people feel emotionally disconnected from themselves. Without silence, there is very little self-awareness. You cannot hear your own thoughts clearly when external noise is constant. And many people unknowingly use stimulation to avoid emotional processing. Constant consumption becomes emotional anesthesia. As long as the mind stays occupied, deeper feelings remain buried temporarily. But buried emotions still affect the nervous system underneath. This is why overstimulation often creates a strange combination of symptoms: mental exhaustion, emotional numbness, difficulty focusing, anxiety, restlessness, inability to relax fully. The brain becomes simultaneously overstimulated and underrested. And modern platforms are designed to encourage this state continuously. Everything competes aggressively for your attention because attention has become valuable economically. The result is that your nervous system rarely experiences uninterrupted recovery. Even rest becomes consumption. This is why many people finish a full day of entertainment feeling strangely drained instead of restored. The nervous system stayed engaged the entire time. Recovery requires more than passive distraction. Real mental recovery usually includes moments where your attention slows down, your nervous system feels safe, your brain stops reacting constantly, your mind is not overloaded with new input. That can happen through quiet walks, sleep, reflection, meaningful conversation, creative expression, genuine stillness, being fully present with one thing at a time. Not because these activities are magically productive, because they reduce cognitive fragmentation. And fragmented attention has consequences beyond focus. It affects your emotional experience of life itself. When your attention is constantly scattered, your sense of presence weakens too. You stop fully experiencing moments. You consume life instead of inhabiting it. And eventually, people start feeling detached from themselves without understanding why. Their nervous system never fully settles long enough to reconnect internally. This is the deeper issue. The problem is not technology itself. The problem is uninterrupted mental occupation. Your brain never receives enough empty space to regulate naturally anymore. And once you realize this, you stop viewing silence as wasted time. You begin understanding it as recovery. Not because you need to become disconnected from the world completely, but because your nervous system was never built to carry non-stop stimulation without consequences. The truth about burnout most people miss. Most people think burnout is about working too much, but burnout is usually deeper than that. You can work very hard and still remain emotionally healthy if your life also contains recovery, meaning, emotional safety, rest, support, balance. Burnout happens when pressure becomes chronic while recovery disappears. That distinction matters, because many people try to solve burnout by taking short breaks while returning to the exact same conditions that created the exhaustion in the first place. And then they wonder why they still feel empty afterward. Burnout is not simply tiredness. It is prolonged depletion without enough restoration. And one of the biggest misconceptions is that burnout always looks dramatic. Sometimes it looks like emotional collapse, but often it looks quieter. Losing interest in things you once cared about, struggling to feel motivated, feeling emotionally detached, becoming cynical, feeling mentally numb, losing the ability to feel excited naturally. You continue functioning externally while internally feeling disconnected from yourself. This is why many people misunderstand burnout completely. They assume, if I'm still productive, I can't be burned out. But high-functioning burnout is extremely common, especially among people who learn to suppress their own needs for long periods. Responsible people, perfectionists, caretakers, people who feel guilty resting, people who tie self-worth to achievement. Burnout often happens to people who ignore their own limits repeatedly, not because they are weak, because they override their internal signals for too long. And eventually, the nervous system stops cooperating the same way. This is important psychologically. The brain cannot remain in prolonged stress states forever without consequences. At some point, emotional energy becomes depleted. Your ability to care consistently weakens. And many people interpret this as personal failure. They think, I lost my ambition. I became lazy. I don't recognize myself anymore. But burnout is often the nervous system protecting itself from unsustainable overload, like a circuit breaker shutting down to prevent deeper damage. Your brain starts conserving energy aggressively. This is why burned out people often feel emotionally flat. Not because they stopped caring, because caring deeply became too expensive psychologically. Everything begins feeling heavier. Conversations, decisions, responsibilities, social interaction, simple tasks, even enjoyable things start feeling difficult to access emotionally. This confuses people deeply. How can I be exhausted when I barely do anything now? Because burnout is not measured only by current activity. It reflects accumulated strain. Your system remembers prolonged overload. And recovery takes longer than most people expect because burnout affects multiple layers simultaneously. Physical energy, emotional regulation, motivation, attention, nervous system stability, sense of identity. This is why some people take vacations and still feel exhausted afterward. The body may leave the stressful environment temporarily, but the nervous system remains conditioned to pressure internally. You cannot fully recover while staying psychologically activated all the time. And this creates another hidden problem. Burned out people often become emotionally self-critical during recovery. They compare themselves to earlier versions. More productive, more energetic, more motivated, more emotionally available. But they forget that earlier versions may not have been carrying the same load. Burnout changes capacity temporarily, and healing often feels frustrating because progress is inconsistent. Some days feel normal. Other days feel heavy again unexpectedly. That inconsistency makes people think they are failing. But nervous system recovery is rarely linear, especially after prolonged stress. This is also why burnout forces people to confront uncomfortable truths about how they've been living. Many realize they ignored their body for too long. They built their identity around productivity. They never created healthy boundaries. They normalized emotional exhaustion. They confused survival with success. Burnout exposes unsustainable systems. And while painful, this realization can become transformative if understood properly. Because eventually you stop asking, how do I push harder? And start asking, how do I build a life that does not require constant self-destruction to maintain? That question changes everything. It shifts recovery from temporary relief into structural change. And that is the part many people miss. Real recovery is not just sleeping more. It is changing the conditions that keep exhausting your nervous system repeatedly. Sometimes that means different boundaries, different habits, different expectations, different relationships with work, different relationships with yourself. Not because ambition is bad, but because sustainable ambition requires sustainability. And maybe the most important truth about burnout is this. Burnout is not your body betraying your goals. It is your body refusing to continue surviving conditions that are slowly harming you. When "I'm fine" becomes a survival habit. One of the most dangerous coping mechanisms people develop under chronic stress is learning how to appear okay while slowly falling apart internally. Not intentionally, adaptively. At some point, many people stop asking for help because they became used to carrying everything alone. So instead of expressing exhaustion honestly, they say, "I'm fine. I'm just tired. It's not a big deal. I'll handle it," even when they are deeply overwhelmed underneath. This habit usually develops for a reason. Some people learned early that expressing struggle made them feel weak, burdensome, ignored, misunderstood, emotionally unsafe. So they adapted by becoming self-contained, capable, independent, emotionally controlled. And while that adaptation may have helped them survive difficult environments, it often creates problems later in life. Because eventually, people become disconnected from their own emotional signals. They stop checking in with themselves honestly. Instead of asking, "How am I actually doing?" they ask, "How do I keep functioning?" That difference changes everything. Functioning becomes the priority. Awareness disappears. And over time, emotional suppression becomes automatic. This is why many exhausted people struggle to recognize their own limits. They override discomfort habitually. They push through fatigue, stress, sadness, anxiety, overwhelm. until their body eventually forces awareness through stronger symptoms. The problem is that chronic suppression creates emotional distance internally. You stop fully feeling what your nervous system has been carrying, not because the emotions disappeared, because your brain learned to mute them temporarily to keep you operational. This is important psychologically. The mind often suppresses emotions it believes are inconvenient, unsafe, or overwhelming. But suppressed emotions still affect the nervous system underneath. The body still carries tension. The brain still absorbs stress. The emotional load still exists internally. This is why some people suddenly break down during very ordinary moments. Not because one small event caused the collapse, because years of unprocessed pressure finally exceeded emotional capacity. A minor inconvenience becomes the final weight added to an already overloaded system. And afterward, people often say, "I don't even know why I reacted like that." But the reaction was rarely about one moment. It was accumulated emotional weight. This is also why many people feel strangely disconnected from themselves. They became experts at performing stability instead of experiencing it genuinely. They know how to appear calm, stay productive, take care of others, remain responsible, suppress emotional discomfort. But internally, they feel exhausted, detached, or emotionally lost. And because they still appear functional externally, their pain often goes unnoticed, sometimes even by themselves. This creates loneliness that is difficult to explain. You may be surrounded by people while still feeling unseen because nobody is interacting with your honest emotional reality. They are interacting with your functioning version, the version that says, "I'm okay," even when you're not. And eventually, this constant emotional masking becomes exhausting itself, because maintaining emotional control requires energy too, especially when your nervous system already feels overloaded. This is why emotional honesty becomes important for healing, not dramatic oversharing. Honesty, being able to admit, "I'm exhausted, I'm overwhelmed, I'm not functioning well right now, I need recovery, I can't keep carrying this the same way." That honesty matters because awareness is what interrupts automatic survival patterns. You cannot heal patterns you refuse to acknowledge honestly. And this is where many people experience an uncomfortable realization. They spent so long trying to appear strong that they never learned how to feel safe being human. Safe admitting limits. Safe resting. Safe needing support. Safe not performing constantly. So healing becomes more than physical recovery. It becomes relearning emotional permission. Permission to slow down, feel honestly, stop pretending constantly, recognize your limits without shame, exist without always proving your worth. That process can feel unfamiliar at first, especially for people whose identity became built around being reliable, capable, and emotionally controlled. But emotional suppression is not the same as emotional strength. Real strength includes self-awareness. It includes recognizing when your nervous system is overwhelmed instead of endlessly overriding the signals. And maybe one of the most important realizations in this entire conversation is this. The sentence, "I'm fine," can become dangerous when you say it so often that you stop noticing it's no longer true. What real recovery actually looks like. One of the biggest misunderstandings about healing is believing recovery happens through one dramatic breakthrough, one perfect routine, one motivational moment, one productive week, one life-changing realization. But real recovery is usually quieter than that. It happens through repeated moments of regulation, small decisions that slowly teach your nervous system. You no longer need to survive every moment like a threat. That process takes time, especially if your body has spent years adapting to pressure, overstimulation, emotional suppression, and chronic stress. Most people want recovery to feel immediate because exhaustion itself feels urgent. But nervous systems rebuild gradually, the same way exhaustion accumulated gradually. And this is important because many people accidentally sabotage their own healing by approaching recovery with the same pressure mindset that exhausted them originally. They turn healing into another performance task, another thing to optimize perfectly. They think, "I need the perfect routine. I need to fix myself quickly. I should already feel better. Why am I still struggling?" But recovery is not a competition. It is a recalibration process. And recalibration requires consistency more than intensity. This is why small forms of restoration matter so much. Sleeping properly, reducing overstimulation, Eating consistently, slowing down mentally, creating emotional boundaries, spending time away from constant input, allowing moments of genuine stillness. These things sound simple, but simple does not mean insignificant. Your nervous system responds to repeated conditions. If your daily life constantly communicates pressure, urgency, and overload, your body adapts accordingly. But if your life begins communicating more safety, rhythm, and recovery, your system slowly adapts to that too. This is one reason routines matter psychologically. Not because routines are magical, because predictable rhythms help reduce nervous system chaos. The body feels safer when life becomes less emotionally unpredictable, and many exhausted people live in constant unpredictability internally. Irregular sleep, emotional suppression, endless stimulation, inconsistent rest, nonstop pressure, constant urgency. Their nervous system never fully settles. Recovery often starts with reducing unnecessary internal chaos, not eliminating all difficulty, just creating enough stability for the body to stop remaining permanently defensive. This also means accepting something uncomfortable. Healing may require changing parts of your lifestyle, identity, or environment that your exhausted self normalized for years. That can include saying no more often, disappointing people occasionally, reducing constant availability, resting before complete collapse, leaving unhealthy environments, changing work habits, creating boundaries around attention and energy. And for many people, these changes feel emotionally difficult at first because survival patterns often become tied to identity. If your worth became connected to productivity, being needed, being dependable, always performing, always handling everything alone, then slowing down can feel psychologically threatening. But recovery requires separating your humanity from your output. You are not only valuable when useful, and your nervous system needs to feel that emotionally, not just understand it intellectually. This is also where self-compassion becomes important, not passive self-pity. Compassion, there is a difference. Self-pity keeps you stuck in helplessness. Compassion allows honesty without self-destruction. It sounds like, I've been carrying too much. My exhaustion makes sense. I need recovery, not punishment. I can take responsibility without attacking myself. That emotional tone matters, because healing becomes much harder when your internal voice behaves like another source of pressure constantly. The nervous system responds to internal environments too, and over time, recovery begins restoring things people thought they permanently lost. Mental clarity returns slowly. Patience becomes easier again. Creativity starts reappearing. Presence becomes possible. Simple moments feel lighter, not instantly, gradually, like circulation returning after numbness. This is why real recovery often feels less dramatic than people expect. You do not suddenly become a completely different person overnight. You slowly regain access to parts of yourself that chronic exhaustion buried. And maybe the most important thing to understand is this. Healing is not about becoming endlessly productive again. It is about becoming sustainable. Because a life that constantly destroys your nervous system is not success, no matter how impressive it looks externally. Real healing creates enough internal stability that you can work, create, love, rest, and exist without feeling like your entire system is permanently under attack. And for many people, that kind of peace is more life-changing than achievement ever was.